Hello, you're tuned to Pregnancy, Birth and Beyond, contemporary conversations where stories, science, traditions and new ideas meet.
There's a process inherent in becoming a mother that pushes us past our edge, that makes us grow from being a woman to becoming a mother.
Look at that, the little girl.
I can't believe it.
Wow, that was intense. I thought that I wasn't going to be able to do it, and then I did.
Pregnancy, Birth and Beyond. It's about family, connected parenting, celebrating your amazing body, connection with your community, and finding your truth. Our show is coming to you from the studios of Bay FM in Byron Bay and is broadcasting across Australia on the Community Radio Network and globally via our podcast at pbbmedia.org.
This episode is sponsored by Mugu Skincare.
You're tuned to Pregnancy, Birth and Beyond, contemporary conversations where stories, science, traditions and new ideas meet. We're coming to you from the studios in our homes and broadcasting through Bay FM 99.9 FM in Byron Bay, Australia, and through our podcast, Pregnancy, Birth and Beyond. I'm speaking with Dr. Igor Tabrizian today. Dr. Tabrizian is an integrative GP with a functional medicine approach, working in hospital medicine for 14 years and then going into combined private and general practice, specialising in nutritional medicine. He looks at inflammation, genetics, cytokines, which are inflammatory messages, gut microbiome, neurotransmitters, mineral and toxic metal levels, inflammatory markers, family history and life story when he meets up with a patient. He then prioritises which issues to remedy first and works through the solutions that are needed in order to support that patient. Dr. Tabrizian specializes in supporting patients with ASD, child behavioural issues, preconception nutrition, autoimmune disorders, and inflammation. Dr. Tabrizian works out of the Health Lodge, which is a modern-day clinical medical centre which encompasses various healthcare providers from a wide array. The Health Lodge takes a modern and advanced approach to medicine and healthcare and provides meaningful continuity of care to its patients. Practitioners come with a holistic, whole-person attitude to healthcare and work together as a team. Clients can access the care, experience and support of Integrative General Practitioners, Naturopaths, Psychologists, Acupuncturists, Physiologists and so many more, all in one place. They also have a wonderful dispensary and offer community events for free, and generally it's a wonderful community asset available to us here in the Shire. I caught up with Dr. Tabrizian about a week ago through Zoom. We discussed preconception nutrition and why it is so important for both parents, and especially the mother, to be well prepared and healthy before becoming pregnant. We touched, of course, on Covid-19 and unpacked some of the common childhood disorders and how many of these can be related to nutrition and inflammation. I had a wonderful time chatting with Dr. Tabrizian, and I'm looking forward to picking his brain once again in the future. Okay, hello, Dr. Igor. Welcome to Pregnancy, Birth and Beyond. Thank you for being with us today. We're doing our remote interviewing as we're all social distancing and staying at home and in our offices without seeing anyone. And we're having our interview through Zoom today. I really appreciate your time and thank you for coming on the show.
You're welcome.
It's lovely to meet you. I've heard so many good things about you through Ren and through looking at the Health Lodge site, and I'm looking forward to meet you in person one day. Tell us a little bit about your background. We're speaking for the listeners with Dr. Igor Tabrizian, and you practice functional and integrative medicine at the Health Lodge in Byron Bay, which is a wonderful integrative medicine clinic in northern New South Wales in Australia. Igor, tell us a little bit about your background and why you got into functional medicine and integrative medicine.
Well, I started off with my degree at the University of West Australia, and for the first 6 years I did general medicine, thinking that I was going to go on to be a general physician. So I did quite a few different specialties. And then in my last year of that, I was poached by anaesthetics because they said they were very impressed with my skills, because as taking bone marrow samples, putting in central lines, sedating people for bone marrows, they thought, oh, you'd probably be good at anaesthetics. So I jumped ship. So I did anaesthetics for 8 years. And then when I was senior registrar, I was asked by the college to hold the fort in Karratha in the northwest of WA until the GP anaesthetists arrived, because they were all leaving en masse on the 13th of January. So I thought, I better, if a professor asks you for help like that, you better say yes. So I went up there and started doing this, but there wasn't enough work for full-time anaesthetics, so I started doing general practice. And while I was there, somehow my patients sensed that I was perhaps a bit more open-minded than the other doctors and started showing me studies about nutritional medicine. And so because I was going to be there for a year, I decided that I could start studying these things in clinical practice and finding correlations. So I started studying minerals like zinc and then iron, vitamin C, vitamin D, etc. And by the time my time finished, I realised that I really should be waking my patients up, not putting them to sleep. So I started when I came back, I was doing general practice locums. And then after a few years, I actually wrote a textbook, wrote some books about nutritional medicine and decided that was a better place to go. So you would call that functional medicine. For me, I was still quite hard line about this. Biochemistry is my best subject, so I considered it to be an extension of biochemistry. But when we start doing testing, the biochemistry for me was quite central. My book was mostly about looking at that. But then other things started to appear in terms of the testing, like understanding the microbiome, understanding inflammation as the underpinning of all chronic disorders. So in general practice, you don't really get taught how to analyse the microbiome or inflammatory markers. And yet the tests are there. It's almost like someone's gone to the future and brought them back. So when I started to look at the various issues, cancer, chronic fatigue, etc., I realised that there was a lot of similarities between these problems, some central things that underpin all of them. And then genetics, we're able to start analysing genetics, and that's been a whole new set of data. So integrative medicine is taking things like microbiome studies, biochemistry, toxicology, inflammatory markers, and putting them together. That's what integrative medicine is. And some people, you can imagine the scope of that's quite large. So when you're working in a practice where everybody's doing that, there's some overlap of skills, but then there's some uniqueness about the skills. And that's what this is about, I guess, is making sure everybody can input something when there's a problem for one person, so that you get a support aspect of this and you get the spectrum of knowledge aspect of this. So for me, I always thought that was more satisfying. That's what the patients wanted. So that's how I wound up here, really.
Yeah, and it's beautiful the way that you work at the Health Lodge, where you work together with other practitioners supporting the single patient if needed. And so the single patient sees one of you, but they have access to those other care providers and practitioners when needed.
Come here, they want that. They actually demand it of us. Actually,
What are some of the most common things that you're seeing in practice?
It depends on where I was. See, in Perth, predominantly the patients were seeing me were children with autism or learning disorders or developmental delays, because my appointments were so scarce that we prioritised those children as such. I still had my patients from before who predominantly had inflammatory conditions. And when I came here, we weren't sure what the demand would be. So I started really being more general since I've been here. And it's a very, very wide range of conditions. I can't say that any two patients have been the same, but all the patients with chronic illness probably have an inflammatory component to it. And so it's up to us as, I suppose, health detectives to figure out what's creating the inflammation and then correct it as best you can. So we're always looking for something to improve, whether it be an inflammatory immune system, a gut that has the wrong bacteria, wrong balance of bacteria in it. There are toxic metals, excuse me. If there are toxic metals, there's a whole range of things, a plethora of tests really. And I guess what we're trying to do is to triage and prioritise which are the ones you go for first, depending on their problems. So I can't say there's been one particular type of problem that turns up over and over, although in the last few weeks, obviously, optimising immunity has been pretty high on the list.
Yes, of course. During these COVID-19 times, I'm sure that that's absolutely presenting, people wanting to make sure that their immunity is as best as it can be. And what kind of support can you offer in that area in terms of immunity support that's general information that anyone could be addressing, for example, at the moment?
There's quite a lot of information on it. And the first one is optimising the antioxidants in a person, so vitamin C, vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin E. That's been talked about quite a lot. Of all of those things, probably the studies there's more studies about vitamin C in terms of a prevention of improving. It's because the concept of antioxidant is relative, because an antioxidant technically gives an electron to something else, but that same antioxidant actually might receive an electron, which means it's pro-oxidant. So it's a bit like a freeway. There's always cars slower than you and cars faster than you, and the only reason it keeps moving is because cars get on and cars get off, so it's a flow. So for instance, vitamin C can act both pro-oxidant and antioxidant, same with vitamin E. And this, the thing with the COVID, the virus itself, is that it can change the immune system from anti-inflammatory to pro-inflammatory. That's one of the reasons why it damages the lungs so badly. So it means if you hang your hat on something that's always antioxidant, it might not work as well as something that can change from antioxidant to pro-oxidant, something adaptable to the virus. And that's why those things turn up so many times when you read about them. That's kind of the biochemical explanation of it.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I didn't know that at all. That's great information to know.
Developed by the founders for their own children, Mugu is made for issues such as cradle cap, nappy rash and eczema.
And so Dr. Igor, I know you've worked
gentle
a lot
for
with
babies
children
and using only the sort of
several
ingredients you would
generations
use
in your
if you had the
practice,
time to
the
make them.
grandparents, the
Mugu
parents
is stocked
and the
in most
grandchildren
pharmacies and health
at the
shops
same
around
time
Australia,
sometimes.
and they ship overseas.
You know, you're very,
Check
very
out their
passionate
wide
about
range of
supporting
affordable
women
products that
during
even
maternity
include
and the perinatal
deodorant,
period.
dental care and vegan makeup
We were
at
chatting a little bit before the
mugu.com.au.
interview started about why that is.
Always read the
case.
label,
And can you
use as directed.
tell us a little bit about that side of your work and why it's so important for you to see mothers before they even get pregnant to start off with?
I think with most things related to medicine, we tend to react to something after it's happened. And so if a woman has a child of the birth defect, then you work retrospectively and said, well, maybe what might have been wrong beforehand. But we know so much about that perhaps we should be thinking about preventing these problems in the first place. And the best time to do that is the nanosecond a couple decide they want to have children. Like we might be having children in a couple of years. That is the time to look at all of the, I suppose, liabilities and assets. If you look at a person biochemically, so the assets are the trace elements, zinc, boron, copper, iron, etc. The liabilities are the potential toxins, which might be heavy metals. One of the things that seems to be common with so many of the children I saw with developmental delays was the level of heavy metals in those children is higher than their parents and higher than their parents' parents. So there's this concept of biomagnification. We're mostly considered to be in food chains that, if you have an oil rig and it releases mercury, then the plankton eat the mercury, and then the whitebait eat the plankton, and then the snapper eat the whitebait, and then the sharks eat the snapper, and then we eat the shark, this type of thing. But the biomagnification effect can be across generations, which means each generation has more toxins than the previous one. And that's quite well known in zoology, biology, marine biology, environmental studies. We've seen that globally. So it means that we should assume that there might be a toxin in a person that could be technically removed before conception. That's what I'm getting at. But we found more than that, and that is maybe the microbiome of the pregnant mother makes a difference as well. And so there's a whole plethora of tests you can do pre-conception that would definitely improve outcomes. We just need to put them all together, because most of these studies are done separately and in isolation. Like, for instance, an Australian study a few years ago showed that low levels of vitamin D in the mother pre-conception have an increased chance of the child having schizophrenia in adult life.
Wow, that's incredible. So can you repeat that? The low levels of vitamin D?
Low levels of vitamin D pre-conception increase the chance of having a schizophrenic child and adult later in life.
That's incredible.
So imagine the spread of that. That's 15, 17, 18 years. And so just that one parameter. But when you add them all up and then say, well, why would a low D cause this problem? Then you'd have to go, well, vitamin D is important for the myelin development and the speed at which the nervous system processes things. Vitamin D is an anti-inflammatory. Vitamin D can mitigate some toxic metals. There's a whole range of reasons why vitamin D would have an effect like that. And then the other question is, well, why would it be low? And so you keep asking questions about these things. You realise that depending on the latitude of where we live. So, for instance, Perth is minus 32 degrees latitude, which means that although there might be plenty of sunlight, there's not that many days when the sun is directly overhead. And it means that if you're wanting to increase your vitamin D using the sun, you'd have to be out for 15 minutes unprotected in the middle of the day, with the sun on your torso. It's a very narrow chance to do that, you see. So then there's vitamin D supplements. The question is, how much do you need? And the only way to find that out is to measure it, treat the patient, and re-measure it to make sure that it is what you consider to be optimal for that person. And that's there's variations in that, how efficient vitamin D is orally. Some people, the reason that they might not have enough vitamin D is they can't absorb it orally, which is then a factor of the fact that their microbiome might not have enough of the particular bacteria called Collencella to activate the bile salts to absorb the fat-soluble vitamins. So then all your work taking that is undone by your microbiome. So you can see.
It's so complex, isn't it? And sometimes, as you mentioned, GPs don't often have that training prior to going into practice in terms of comprehensive microbiome and bacterial, and they've got some, but in terms of understanding the microbiome, which now we're learning that we've evolved with over our entire time of existence. All life has evolved in interaction with bacteria, and positive and negative interactions, and now we're learning how pivotal our own bacteria in our own bodies are to our health and our well-being. And when we go to see a doctor with an issue that is undoubtedly somehow related to what's going on inside our gut, to our microbiome, if they don't have that background, it's really difficult to assess what's going on. But at the same time, I can see that there's so many different interactions and so much to learn. It's tricky in many ways. It's tricky for somebody who's focusing on being in practice. So what drives you? I mean, I'm so interested. What drives you? Is it just seeing more and more patients and being exposed to different things?
I have to say, I started out in medicine as a devout skeptic, and so it takes me, it takes quite a long time to convince myself that something is actually true. I have to double and triple check it. So I guess the part of that is double and triple checking that what we're writing about, the microbiome, actually turns out in the real world at the coalface. So luckily we have enough testing to I guess I'm always trying to prove the hypothesis or disprove the hypothesis. So, for instance, if somebody says, if there's an excessive amount of Klebsiella in the intestine, and that triggers a gene HLA-B27, which then creates ankylosing spondylitis, then that has a couple of implications. Well, first of all, you can understand why the person got that disease. You can work backwards to say, well, if children have this genetic marker, then we'll do our damnedest to make sure that their microbiome doesn't incorporate this Klebsiella. And then the third thing is, well, if that particular bacteria can do it, does that mean that there are others? And so over time, we're starting to increase the information about which of these bacteria are considered to be pro-inflammatory. So I feel I'm part of that system that's accumulating knowledge for the next generation. So there's an obligation there to make sure that what I find doesn't just stay in my office, which is one of the frustrating things about general practice. As a sole trader, that you're just in your office and your knowledge is just a one-to-one. So that's why teaching, is useful from my point of view, so that I make sure that other people know what I found as well. And then the global collective consciousness of this data. And then, so if you have enough people thinking like that, then you move forward, you become progressive. So I guess what motivates me is I guess disseminating the truth about things.
That's so beautiful and so important, and it's so wonderful to hear that as a practitioner you're really getting you're doing your best and working really hard to get to the source of what's going on for that individual. And I think as an individual, as a healthcare consumer, so when I come to see a doctor, I want to know that I can have access to somebody who's really thinking the best, how can they help me? How can we figure out what's going on for you, and how can we support you in getting back to equilibrium, back to a state where you're feeling better, and in relation to what's going on for me. And it's just so wonderful and so reassuring to know that there are people out there really working so hard to support patients in that way.
Say that everyone who works here thinks like me.
Yeah. I've spoken to a couple of you before at the Health Lodge, and I absolutely adore interviewing the people that work at the Health Lodge, because you do have that whole being, well-being approach. I mean, can you explain maybe a little bit about this approach and how it works on the ground at the Health Lodge? How do you share information? How do you communicate with one another, and what does that look like?
I guess we've got several ways of collaborating. The first one is triaging. You know, patients self-refer, and they don't always know which practitioner would be best for them. So in a lot of ways, the doctors are the first people they link up with. So then, for instance, if it is something complicated like the microbiome, I know there are practitioners who are very adept at reading and treating these things. So that's one way to refer within the practice. We have a secure messaging system as well, and sometimes you get questions about things, or a question like, can I pop in for 5 minutes and just discuss this test with you? We have that, and then we have team meetings twice a week. Excuse me. We have team meetings twice a week where, with the patient's consent, and that's make doubly sure that we do have that the problem might be discussed at a meeting where there's a whole diverse group of people with different skills, and that's really helpful, because sometimes there might be a suggestion made by one of those practitioners that's really helpful, or it might be a learning experience for everyone about this. And I know that that's definitely happened, that I've been able to put forward something that people didn't know of, and I've learned something that I didn't know because a practitioner put forward something. So you have these exchange of quite large nuggets of information. So yeah, it's basically how it works. And sometimes what will happen is when you're brainstorming something like that, you'll find a modality that actually you wouldn't have thought of that is useful for this particular patient. So
yeah, I mean, it's wonderful. I think in general practice, of course, GPs will have some people to talk to outside of the practice, but it's, you know, meeting to meeting to meeting, or appointment to appointment to appointment. I mean, while as in this scenario, it feels like if you compare it to other team meetings where you have that chance to throw things backwards and forth, and to look at them from a very different angle, and to discuss them with a few different people, and then something emerges from that may not emerge just from your own thinking, being in front of the information by yourself.
Yeah, these team meetings actually are based on inpatient hospital team meetings. I distinctly remember my time in geriatric medicine, and we would have, you know, the nurses who are looking after that particular patient. We'd have, you know, the physios, OTs, maybe speech pathologists, you know, consultant, registrar, interns, and medical students, all contributing to that meeting. And so again, you have a diversity of experience and skills. And it's very similar here, except that the minimum skill is an experienced naturopath. It's not a medical student who's still learning things from books, basically. So the minimum skill level is much higher in terms of the experience. You're getting the combined experiences. It's huge. So
sounds like such a great environment to work in, and so wonderful at the end for the patient that they're having access to this pool of minds and knowledge and information and support as well in so many ways, that translates in the setting with their care provider in a really different way. quite a holistic way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
You can use that term without being too new age about it, because holistic is in the whole person, and in the bigger picture of things as well. And sometimes you might find out about the social situation of a person that may not necessarily come up in a medical consultation, and that might be the thing that's holding them back. Let's say, or a financial aspect that might be holding them back. So yeah, you have a bigger picture.
Absolutely, and I think that is definitely the key to supporting people going into the future, in terms of really moving from that kind of disease-oriented way of practice to health and well-being-oriented practice, where we're not just taking care of the symptoms and trying to get that person not having the symptoms anymore, but rather we're looking at the upstream causes of things and supporting them in a more holistic way. I mean, so much of the research has shown that just the relationship with the care provider can be a key to that person's well-being, to them getting better faster, to them getting better at all, if they have a really wonderful relationship with the care provider. And I cannot imagine a more wonderful way where the care provider asks you more about your whole being, rather than just focuses on the symptoms, because there's only that little amount of time, which is, fair enough. We're up against that in the way the system is set up. But for the consumer on their end, it's wonderful to know that the care provider really cares about their whole life and what's going on for them, whether that's socially or emotionally or mentally, or with their families, with their work, and they can see that those pressures do impact on the actual symptomatic, how the person is presenting. And so from that perspective, as a consumer, I find that really reassuring and wonderful to hear that more and more practitioners are practicing in that way, and really showing up in that way in the community. It's wonderful. Thank you, Igor, so much. I think we're nearing almost the end of our interview. Is there anything you would like to leave with our listeners today? Any little nugget of wisdom or anything to share? Even it could be around anything, just in general, in preparation, or about COVID-19, anything you'd like.
Well, all the people who work here are taking a political stand. We're saying that we disagree with how the system is working at the moment, And if I were to make a comment about the longer term, is that the people who want this type of medicine should voice that to the people who are making decisions, the legislature of this country. So, because otherwise it's going to be assumed that they don't want this, and then they'll be gone. We've already seen some of this eroded away with the removal of, rebates for naturopathic consultations. And that certainly really wasn't the public voice that did that. So if I were to say something, is tell your members of parliament what you really want for your health, because otherwise they won't know. So if I were to say something, is tell your members of parliament what you really want for your health, because otherwise they won't know.
Absolutely. I think that's just the most wonderful note to finish on. We're involved heavily in consumer engagement and advocacy and representation in maternity care, and that is the number one thing we say to people. If there's something that you want, you need to advocate for it yourself, for it to be there in your community. And on that note, I would really like to thank you, Dr. Igor Tabrizian, for being with us today on the show. I'm incredibly grateful, and it's so wonderful to meet you for the first time over Zoom, over the internet, over these wonderful waves that we have, even in these different times at the moment. Thank you so much, and I really hope we can have another interview one day in the future. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you so much.
And that concludes my interview with Dr. Igor Tabrizian from the Health Lodge in Byron Bay here in Australia. It's been a pleasure creating this show for you today. I hope you're out there staying safe, staying home, doing exercise, communing with nature, eating well, connecting with your friends and family, and listening to some awesome podcasts. That's it from me, Annalee, for Bay FM and Pregnancy, Birth and Beyond. Have a gorgeous day.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Pregnancy, Birth and Beyond. Tune in next week for more information and inspiration, bringing us full circle. You can find our show on iTunes, Spreaker, the usual social media under Pregnancy, Birth and Beyond, and our website at pbbmedia.org.